This is Chill Bill coming at you live from K-Troll, here to introduce another exciting episode of Skylanders Portalcasters, the podcast discussing anything and everything Skylanders. Over to you.
Thank you, Chill Bill, for that amazing introduction, and welcome everybody to today's July 4th special of Skylanders Portalcasters, where I am joined by my co-host Trioxen to discuss the various ways to enjoy a Skylanders game outside of the norm, which the norm in this case would be a casual playthrough where the game is over once the game is over. Our discussion today will touch on various topics such as collectathon completionism, speedrunning, and even a little bit in the way of challenge runs. Trioxen, how are you feeling about this topic today?
I am feeling very excited about this topic, actually. I myself have been a completionist in the past. I've mellowed out in my old age, but Skylanders has always been a very rewarding smorgasbord of collectathons for me. And I am excited to learn about speedrunning, because that is an area I have not dabbled in very much at all.
Very nice. It sounds like this is going to be a lot of fun then. A lot of fun indeed. So, before we dive into the discussion as a whole, I would like to take a moment really quick to go over what each of these things is. Now, collectathon completionism is exactly what it sounds like it is. It is where you essentially try to complete everything in each level, which would tend to end with getting all of the level stars. That would indicate that you've done everything that level has to offer. And then overall collecting all of the stars, all of the collectibles, etc. throughout the game itself, because a lot of that is done in like the hub world, etc. Speedrunning is exactly what speedrunning sounds like. It is the act of trying to beat the game as quickly as possible, and there are various different runs available in order to do so, different categories in which you could run. And then there are things like challenge runs. And a challenge run is a playthrough of Skylanders with a set of self-imposed rules intended to make the game a little more challenging, which to a lot of people equates to a bit more fun, more exciting. The very basics of which are things like, if a Skylander is wiped out, it's done for the rest of the playthrough. Now, Trioxen, you've mentioned that you have a bit of a history with collectathon completionism. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about that?
Well, all right. So I guess to start off with is that I always, since I was a kid, was always very much a completionist. And as you all are probably aware by now, my love of Sonic the Hedgehog, it started with the insane task of trying to collect every single ring in a level. So, of course, when Skylanders first came out, it initially, just from the look of it, scratched that completionist itch. Because you're looking at a game that's like most platformers where, there's different things to obtain, different things to unlock, and you had a lot of different characters with the ability to unlock multiple abilities and level them up and even decorate them in some capacities. So initially it looked amazing. And then once you get into even Spyro's Adventure, you really kind of understand, the more you get into it, how in-depth and how much there is to chew on in terms of collecting. Like initially 32 base Skylanders, not counting variants, and just each Skylander holds an X amount of coins, and you can max that out up to level 10 back then. So just the idea of having every single Skylander and having all of them max out on everything, and just how much time you could sink into that. It was, for me as a collector, it was a dream come true. And then as the series progressed, it just got more and more, I'm going to say insane. It almost got more insane. Just, you're adding more Skylanders with more things to do with them or things to unlock with them. You're adding more different things to unlock. Changing legendary treasures to, in Giants, like decorate Flynn's ship. There was also the little the wheels on that machine where you can give different modifiers as you play the game.
The Luckatron wheel.
The Luckatron wheel, thank you. The way the games kept evolving with what you could unlock, as well adding more and more characters with more unlockables within them, it really was just a dream come true for someone who wants to unlock it all. And I mean, that was me maybe like 10 years ago. Now I've mellowed out for sure. But even though I'm more content with a smaller pool of Skylanders and just, having just play through one of the games front to back without worrying about making sure I had everything by the end of a level, I still really want to max out my characters. I still want to hit I believe it's 66,000 gold for each of them. There's just something about it it's really a core part of Skylanders, and it's been executed so well across the franchise.
When it comes to being a completionist within the game of Skylanders itself, not counting the collectionism aspect behind it, there are a lot of things to be collected in this game. As you've mentioned already, there's the legendary treasures, there's the Luckatron wheels, there's all kinds of hidden elements in every level of Skylanders. There's not just money and experience to be found. There are a wide variety of things, from picture frames to hats to soul gems to a ranged variety of what they refer to as legendary treasures. There are enemies to be captured, enemies and bosses to be defeated, and there's even things like speedrun times built into the levels, as well as finding every location and defeating a certain number of enemies, which in the case of Spyro's Adventure at least in the case of the Wii version, meant defeating every enemy in the stage. So completionism in this aspect actually has quite a lot to it, and it adds a lot of value, gameplay-wise, to a playthrough of the game.
Yeah, and I agree, like, it's the replayability of Skylanders just based on collecting things alone is, like, I don't know an exact number, but let's take Spyro's Adventure, for example. Like, if you were just to start from level 1 and go all the way to the boss, that'd take you X amount of hours, but just the fact that you can almost basically multiply that amount of playtime just trying to capture everything, all the rewards that you've mentioned, and even just trying to find all the little hidden areas that add a little tick to the end of your level run, it's almost unfathomable for just one game. And then you just throw in a whole franchise that does that. And again, with the physical Skylanders, completing each one of those up to max level and max loot, it's probably one of the bigger reasons I've fallen in love with this franchise.
Now, I should mention that I myself am a completionist. I have been completing games since a younger age. I don't remember exactly when I started. I don't remember exactly which the first game was that I, quote, completed. I remember starting out on a NES system, and there was no real way to track completion of a game on that console. And even had there been, like, had I thought to make checklists or whatever of all the things that could be done, I was at that point in time too young to really think of that idea. And I hadn't yet been introduced to a completed file of anything. Not that you could really have much in the way of save files on that console, but it just wasn't something that was doable or reasonably doable on the NES. Then we got a PlayStation 1, and I was introduced to games like Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon, where when you load your save file, it clearly states a percentage. And in-game, there are, in the case of Spyro, there are checklists offered to show you what you've got in each level. And in the case of Crash Bandicoot, it was before you enter the portal to enter the world, it had everything listed above that portal that you could find there. Not necessarily how to find it, for example, in the way of the colored gems, but it had something to indicate that there was something here more to find. So some of the games I would have completed first and reached that 100% marker on first would have been Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon. And I remember specifically finishing and completing the Spyro games because I don't believe any of them ended at 100%. They were all a little bit over because once you hit that 100%, something was unlocked and there was more to get. I continued completing games, and I've enjoyed being a completionist because one thing I came to realize as I got older and was having to buy my own games and whatnot, what I came to realize was I enjoyed a game more, it had more value to me, if I got more playtime out of it for the money I was spending. And one way to increase a game's playtime for value is to do everything that that game has to offer. And so completing games just became a part of what I did. It was just naturally what I aimed for every time I picked up a new game, because then I was maximizing the amount of enjoyment I got out of my dollar. And Skylanders was no different in that it offered the same thing with its collectathon aspects. Upon playing for the first time and realizing that those aspects were there, I was thrilled to sit down and take the time to 100% everything in the game. But then, as Trioxen has brought up, I had a tendency to take completionism a step further, and just completing the game itself isn't always enough to satisfy me, especially in a game like Skylanders, where you're basically buying DLC for more characters and more characters and more characters. Now, what's going to end up happening is if I want to stick to that whole I've done it all, I've done everything there is to do, I also needed to max out every character. I had to max their level, I had to max out their upgrade paths and their purchasable skills, and that ended up adding an abundance of time to my playthroughs. However, this is where it gets interesting, because, well, I've stated already that more play time tends to equal more enjoyment. When all you're doing is grinding out levels and money, that tends to not remain the case. And therefore, because I insisted to myself that I needed to do this, and I persisted in this, I essentially introduced myself to the core principles of speedrunning, in that I would be replaying the same stage over and over again, one stage for experience, one stage for money. Sometimes they were the same stage, sometimes they weren't. But then my goal would become to finish maxing out this character as quickly as possible, which led to me trying to complete this level that I'm repeating as quickly as possible each time, so that it's not 20 minutes, then load the level again, go 20 minutes, load the level again. I was going faster. I was trying to make it so that that level up that was taking me 8 minutes before, I'm now doing it in 5. And that led to me basically learning the principles of speedrunning. And then later on down the line, when I heard a creator that I interacted with mention that they were speedrunning Pokemon, and then had them explain to me what exactly that means, what that entails, that immediately got me interested in seeing how far I could take that with Skylanders. And that led into me becoming a speedrunner as opposed to trying to just speed through my completion of these characters.
I think that's actually really interesting that collecting led you down to speedrunning just via efficiency, because I've definitely been down that road where it's like trying to collect every single character, even the ones that you're not as particularly interested in, and then also now having to spend upwards of 10 levels, depending on which game you're playing, of playing with them and leveling them up. It just, sometimes it can feel like a chore, or it's just you're not as into it. So I really, that's a fascinating that is what led you to more efficiency, which then led you into speedrunning.
Right, and that efficiency, that's something that I learned not only through this game, but grinding has been ever present in my life as a gamer from the time that I started playing Pokemon even. And as any of us who have experienced that series know, sometimes it's a lot of time you gotta put into training a Pokemon before it'll evolve. I was a completionist at a young age, and I was trying to fill that Pokedex at a young age, which kinda, I think, led into the whole I need to collect all the Skylanders as well, so it was the physical collectionism side of completionism as well. And then, yes, it was just absolutely the need for efficiency that led me to this entire other community and style of play that really just opened up the world to me in the realm of Skylanders. Because what speedrunning did for me is not only did it make more efficient the as you said, what essentially became a chore of maxing out each Skylander. And it gave each Skylanders game a much higher replay value for me, because now not only am I just completing the game one time through on top of a casual playthrough to initially beat the game, but I'm finding myself sitting down and beating the same game over, start to finish. I would play start to finish, sometimes upwards of twice a day, to try and get my speedrun time down. So the sheer number of times I played through the game was increased, and my enjoyment was increased, not because I was playing the game more, but because this was a new thrill. It was something exciting. It was something I enjoyed. It's something that I've grown to become passionate about, to the point where I've expanded speedrunning outside of the Skylanders games. This added a whole new aspect, a whole new way to look at this franchise. So after several years of my son and I playing Skylanders literally every weekend, and then me grinding on weeknights, it breathed a new life into a series that was starting to feel a little, I want to say, tedious at that point in time. And it opened my eyes to the fact that there's more than one way to enjoy a game. And when it comes to the speedrunning itself, there's a lot that actually goes into speedrunning. It's not just sitting down and playing through the game as quickly as you can, because, well, yes, that is in essence what speedrunning is. There are things you can learn. There are strategies that you can learn and techniques that you can learn. Whether you develop them yourself or you learn them from somebody else, there are always other techniques that will help bring you from just sitting down and playing the game as quickly as you can to how can I shave X amount of time off of this run. You find yourself setting a goal for yourself, whether it be, okay, I want to do this run a minute faster or 5 minutes faster. And you break down where you think you might be able to gain that time, and you learn the techniques in order to make it happen. And it's just such a different experience trying to learn and master new techniques, and in some cases glitches. I'm a glitchless runner myself, but there are glitches that can oftentimes be your ally, and there's a slew of different ways to play. And in the end, it feels very rewarding, especially when you're seeing your run times progress and become progressively shorter. My first Skylanders speedrun, I ran Skylanders Trap Team, and I believe I was just under the 4-hour mark. And then after a couple of months of practice, I got that down to a 3-hour, 18-minute run. And I just felt immensely accomplished after that. And it renewed my love for a game that had kind of gotten a little bit stale after completing it so many times.
Honestly, from everything you just said about speedrunning, it's for someone who isn't a speedrunner and is not even initiated in that world of gaming. You said a lot of things that are actually really fascinating to me. And I think with the first one that I want to talk about is that your game just doesn't end when the game says it ends. And what I mean by that is that there is an end to a Skylanders game for a collectathon. You can collect all the things, you can max level all your Skylanders, so on and so forth. There is an actual end in sight. But from what it sounds like with speedrunning is that there could be an end, but it's only, I feel like there's always room to go further. So you can complete a game in, say, 3.5 hours, but then you can always try pushing that and finding new exploits or new ways to cut that time, even by seconds. And I find that incredibly fascinating because it seems like there's just a constant challenge there.
And there really is. And that's honestly one of the things that fascinated me, was learning how to find ways to save myself some time without actually exploiting any glitches or anything of the sort. Because as I said, I'm a glitchless runner. Now, there are the any percent runs where any glitch is allowed and you can absolutely break the game on your way to the finish line. But I would have to try and figure out, like, maybe running the path to the left might be a couple seconds faster than running the path to the right. Skipping every battle that you don't have to fight and risking taking a little bit of damage to just charge through and save the time that that battle would have taken, which is often several seconds. And while it may not seem like a couple of seconds is a big deal, in the world of speedrunning, every second is precious. And you learn ways to shave off those seconds. Like, one of the things that I learned was with the character that I run for Swap Force and Trap Team, I oftentimes have to make the decision of whether this enemy that I have to fight is worth taking the time to actually fight and defeat, or just picking up and throwing down a hole. If they're going to go down in 1 or 2 hits, it's definitely more worth it to just deliver that damage. Whereas if it's going to take 4 or 5 hits, it's quicker to perform the slow action of picking them up and throwing them off the ledge. And it's a matter of learning not just your techniques, but when to apply which techniques. That honestly makes it a lot of fun. It makes it so that it never really gets old, because, as Trioxen just said, there is no end to it. The end is when you want it to be. And even then, if you decide, okay, I'm done, I'm walking away, this is my time, you can always come back and try and improve upon it later.
Yeah, and just that level of strategic thinking that is needed in, and I could be wrong, it could just be, but I feel like for Skylanders especially, because you're dealing with so many different characters that you have access to, and different abilities, which one is going to work best when you're dealing with each enemy that you come across. Like you said, it's just, I'm going to use the word a lot, but fascinating to me, that just to be able to think like that. And this sort of ties into the other thing that, from what you said, that really stood out to me was the community aspect of speedrunning, where, I mean, for every video game, there's always a community around it, and there's always people willing to help and give tips. But I feel like with speedrunning, there's just another level of it, where it's almost, from what I'm hearing, it almost harkens back to the playground talks back in the day, where you like talk with your friends at recess about a game that you're all playing, and just being like, oh, that you can, if you hit this code here or whatever, you hit, you jump at this spot, you get, this and this, or you can skip that. And it's having a community who's trying to help each other basically just blast through a game just to shave seconds or milliseconds off of a time. There's something very endearing about that. Just the sharing of techniques to try and improve upon time and maybe hit new records, personal records, or even community-wide.
And it very much is like that playground aspect, which is very interesting when you consider the fact that most speedrunners are indeed competing against each other in that same game. But when we're sharing techniques with each other and ideas and brainstorming ways to overcome things, while we are competitive with each other, we also want to push each other to do better, because there's sort of like a friendly community rivalry at that point, and we're all learning from each other. So maybe you learn a technique from me, and I learn a technique from you, and we're able to implement those both together, and both of us now have improved our run times because we've learned techniques from each other. And it's just a very community way of improving ourselves at a game that we love playing. And I can honestly say it's a game that we love playing because it takes a certain amount of love for a game to be willing to play the same game over and over and over again, countless times. If you don't enjoy the game, you're not going to be able to hold up doing that because you're not going to be enjoying yourself.
Which actually really leads into my third thing that you said that really fascinated me about all this is, and I don't know why this never clicked before now, but the drive of a self-imposed challenge. You can keep playing this game over and over and over again because it's a challenge that you put for yourself and you yourself want to beat. It's not something the game told you to do, because I don't know about everyone else, but for me, if there's a certain point where I'm just gonna be like, you know what, I'm not gonna do this for a challenge that a game or something else gave to me. But when it's something that in my core I know I want to achieve, that's almost something that's just basic instinct in humans, is like, I want to climb that big rock because I want to climb that big rock, or so on and so forth. just the idea of having a self-imposed challenge and being able to meet that, I feel like it makes sense. For me anyways, it just seems to click now that having your own personal drive is why we can keep going back to these games over and over and over again, even after the game tells us that we're done.
And those self-imposed challenges are also the key behind the third topic that was brought up at the beginning as to a variable way to enjoy a game, and that is challenge runs. Now, challenge runs are playthroughs of a game full of nothing but self-imposed challenges. There is nothing in the game holding you to these challenges. There is nothing enforcing the rules except the fact that you have set them and you have decided to stick to them. You have decided, this is how I want to play the game, this is what I'm aiming for as a goal, and you're setting out to complete it. The most common forms of challenge runs out there are typically referred to as Nuzlockes, which that name did originate from the Pokemon franchise where the challenge was developed. But the name has carried over to numerous other titles as just a simple way of stating that your characters, if they are taken out, are gone permanently. It's a self-imposed rule that a lot of communities, a lot of players have decided to implement because it adds a certain level of excitement to the playthrough. In the case of Skylanders, if you impose Nuzlocke rules upon yourself, you are limiting your Skylander to one life, and quite likely also limiting how many total Skylanders you can use for the entire playthrough of the game. You might also be limiting based on other things, based on element, based on only core figures, or gimmick landers, or anything of that sort. Whatever you feel like will make the game both more challenging and, more importantly, more fun for you. And those are just the most basic of the basic of self-imposed challenges.
Mm-hmm. And if that's the basic of the basic, you can go right off the deep end with anything else that you want to come up with. Do you just want to play with one Skylander through all 7 games? Now I'm paralyzed by the the options that are available that you could do.
As you've stated, the possibilities are quite literally endless. I was in the process myself of developing my very own type of challenge run. I was calling it a generation lock, which I've come to understand there is already a definition for that is a little bit different than what I was trying to do. But what I intended to do with my challenge run was play through all 6 games in order, using only one Skylander from each element for the entirety of the games. So a total of 10 Skylanders. I was going to have difficulty restrictions, restricting myself to a certain level of difficulty or higher, and the caveat so that I wouldn't be just using Spyro's Adventure characters plus a light and dark later on was that I didn't have to choose my Skylander for every element right at the beginning of the game. It gave me the option to kind of pick and choose as I go. So if I managed to beat Spyro's Adventure with only 3 Skylanders, I had the ability then to go into Giants and then pick a Skylander or 2, or however many I want, from Giants that wouldn't have been available in Spyro's Adventure as long as the element hadn't already been used, and add that to my playthrough. Or, for example, if I made it all the way to Swap Force without using a tech element Skylander, I could then pick up Magna Charge. If I managed to make it all the way to Imaginators without using an Earth Skylander, I could then add Barbella to the roster. But I would have to play well enough that I didn't need additional Skylanders to get there, all within that limit of 10. And that was basically the kind of rule set that I was formulating for myself. And there are just so many ways that I could have made it even more challenging along the way. Or, as some people prefer to do, there are some people who will try to do speedruns or challenge runs that require you to get 100% in the game before it's over.
Well, that'd be an interesting one. And your own challenge run, did you have a name for it? Did you call it anything specific?
I was calling it my generation lock.
Your generation lock. I believe I'm going to go try that now because that actually sounds really fun. I guess as far as other challenges that I myself have completed. I've definitely done the full prison break run where I only exclusively used one prison break through, and if I lost him at any level, like he died, I had to restart the level and just keep going until I could get past that, which was a real challenge for getting to the end of Spyro's adventure, that's for sure, with that boss battle. Another one I tried was use exclusively insect-based Skylanders. Yeah, I did it with superchargers. It was just exclusively insect Skylanders because I could max out how many I could have.
That allowed you access to Thrillipede.
Yeah, Thrillipede was a big help. That was actually, I only started the challenge once I acquired him, which was smart. But yeah, you can really do a challenge of any design just around even things as like frivolous as like what sort of creature is your Skylander based off of, or what color does it kind of fall into in the palette. Like you could try and do a whole run with just, I mean, it'd probably end up you'd be stuck with the same element if you, but you know, you could do just red Skylanders. It's unfathomable for this franchise compared to many others. The ability to swap things up and do different kinds of combinations of self-imposed challenges. I'm just at the tip of the iceberg, and it goes a lot deeper.
Another notable challenge run that I did was actually not even based in the storyline of a Skylanders game. It was in Skylanders Trap Team, and it was a challenge run through the Chaos Doom Challenge, which I called the Chaos Doom Lock, where I allowed myself one Skylander per element from 8 elements. I could choose which 8 they were, so I could swap in light or dark for something else if I wanted to. It didn't have to be the core 8, but I was restricted to 8 Skylanders of unique elements. I had restrictions on how many turrets could be built. I had restrictions on when the turrets could be rebuilt if destroyed. I had restrictions on difficulty level, and I also added the final rule of if that mystery box were to break, I just lose. No matter how well I was doing, no matter how well my turrets were holding up, I lose. And it turned out to be a really, really fun challenge that actually gave me a lot more respect for a couple of Skylanders that I never would have thought would have been fun to use.
That's a really, really cool part of that is that, yeah, like you can, with access to all these different characters and these new challenges, you can really see how these characters shine just by putting them through the ringer of whatever challenge you concoct. And I gotta say, just the thought of the pressure that you create for yourself when in the Chaos Doom challenge, where if the mystery box gets destroyed, your play ends. I was getting heart palpitations because that feeling.
It's very intense. Very similar to the feeling of being in the middle of a speed run. You're on pace for a personal best. You're coming up on a really intense section, perhaps a boss fight, where you know it's always a struggle and that timing is everything, but the blood is pumping and you're going to try to do it anyway, and you're going to push through and hope to reach that new PB. It's a very similar feeling. It's exhilarating, it's exciting, and it really gets the blood pumping, and that's really what these different ways to play are intended to do. It makes the game more exciting, more fun. It makes you want to play it more. And self-imposed challenges and rules are a very, very simple way of actually doing that.
Absolutely, because we wouldn't do it if we were just going to snooze through it, you know? The addiction to the adrenaline that's pumping through for all those little things. I can imagine a speed run just doing really well and then just getting sideswiped by an enemy, and then you just get hit and you lose those couple of seconds from your character's response to that, and knowing that could damage your entire run. It's just mind-boggling. So really, in the end, what this all boils down to is that outside of what the game presents to you, there are a million plus a billion ways to enjoy a game. And Skylanders as a franchise has really a million plus a billion plus a trillion ways to play and enjoy this game however you wish. Whether it's you want to beat a personal best at how fast you can run through a level or a whole game or the franchise, whether it's completing everything 100% or even plus 100%, depending, or even just setting out a challenge for yourself that appeals to you because there's no limit to what kind of challenge you can make for yourself. There's something for everyone in these games, and that's really a beautiful thing for Skylanders Legacy to leave with us, is we can keep playing these games forever and ever and always find something that'll keep our blood pumping and hearts hooked in trying to do something new and exciting and fun.
Very well said. Do you hear footsteps? That's kind of weird. It's usually really quiet around here. It's almost as though somebody's running? Oh, it's just Hugo. He's running down the hall for some reason with his handbook above his head, and it looks like he's really in a hurry to meet with us.
So as Hugo speeds towards us, we notice that he is running away from something. A few somethings. Little feathery black balls of fury screeching at him. They seem to be like little birds, but as Hugo gets closer, we notice that, oh, those are Sonic Boom's babies. Hugo, what did you do? How could you anger the babies? So that's right. On today's episode of Hugo's Handbook, we will be looking at Sonic Boom and her little clutch of baby griffins.
Ooh, fun.
How do you feel about Sonic Boom there, Ditto?
Well, Sonic Boom is a very interesting design. Very obviously an air element Skylander. There could be no other option for that. And my opinion on Sonic Boom, actually, for the most part, is on a sliding scale, depending on which game we're talking about. Because, well, I love her design, and the babies are cool, especially that she can summon them to assist her in battle, and the way that those upgrade is really, really cool. But, well, she is really, really good in Spyro's Adventure, and to a lesser degree in Giants. Once we move over to games like Swap Force and Trap Team, she becomes less useful and less powerful. Her range seems a lot more limited, and she's just very, very forgettable in the lineup of those games. So when it comes to how useful a Skylander she is, or how good a Skylander she is, it's kind of on a sliding scale. But if we only look at where she premiered or had another series come out, so the first two games, Spyro's Adventure and Giants, she was actually really very useful, very cool, nice move pool, decent range, and once again, and I can't emphasize enough, a great design.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like her design essentially is just a simple black feathered griffin with little bits of armor, and it's just I think it's one of those KISS rules where it's just keep it simple, and it works exceedingly well in her case. I think she's a griffin, and as you said, you can immediately tell she's air elemental. And just even as far as game design, she is, she utilizes minions, or in her case, babies, which we see with quite a few Skylanders. But there's something a little more endearing about it. They're cute little babies, and then also just how her abilities will stack, or her roar will increase with those babies, as I can't remember which upgrade it is, but if she screams at her babies, those babies will scream as well. So seeing how her abilities upgrade and stack very well with each other, it's just, she's a very well thought out in terms of gameplay design as well as her aesthetic design, in my opinion.
Now, I like that they went and made a Griffin Skylander, because Griffins tend to go underutilized in a lot of fantasy RPG style settings. So having one here as a playable Skylander was actually a really, really cool thing to see. I myself am a fan of griffins overall and would like to see them utilized more. So in this case, that really helps the case of her design, which, as you said, it was just a keep it simple type of thing, and that's exactly what they did. She's very clearly a griffin, and she's got just the little headpiece and essentially bracers, and that's it. And the fact that her name is Sonic Boom, and therefore her power is the screeching that she then passes on through her minions, or her babies in this case, that was actually really, really clever. And honestly, I find it very aesthetically pleasing that this is the case, especially with that name to go along with it, because it just kind of is perfect for a creature that would have naturally a power like screeching.
Yeah, he's just every angle you look at this character, it's very much it makes sense. Like every little thing, it just click, click, click makes sense. I will say though, her Wow Pow for her Series 2 figure is quite interesting in the concept of you're combining your 3 to 4 regular babies into one super baby. I don't know how that would work in lore wise, if there is a explanation for that, but that is something.
It really is something. I also don't have an explanation for that. And I haven't seen any instances where having that one super baby is more beneficial than just having the regular babies either.
Mm-hmm.
And between that and the fact that she does become more and more underwhelming as the games go on, I will say that does count against her for quite a lot as well.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And it's, with that sliding scale and her not having a Series 3 or 4, any other form of her release, it does unfortunately hinder her like many of the earlier Skylanders as you move through the franchise.
Correct, because she didn't get a variant at all. It was just the one Series 2, and that was it, I believe.
Yeah, and then I think a Chase figure that was a glow in the dark one, but that, as we know, that doesn't count much for in the games.
Right.
All right, Ditto. So now I think it's the time where we're going to tally up our scores on a scale of 1 to 7, with 7 being perfection. How would you rate Sonic Boom?
In this case, I find myself in a very interesting position because I would like to give her somewhere around a 4.5, but we only do whole numbers for our individual rating. I feel like she's slightly better than average because of her design. Like, it pushes her over, but not high enough to move from a 4 to a 5. So I think in this case, I'm going to have to give Sonic Boom a 4 out of 7.
I find myself in a similar boat to you in Sonic Boom's case, because I do enjoy her, definitely in the earlier games playthrough-wise, and as you probably can tell, I enjoy her overall design as a character. And with her not having that longevity through the franchise, I'm going to have to place her, I kind of wish I could do a decimal here too, but I'm going to give her a 5 out of 7. So with our scores put together and averaged out, Sonic Boom gets a nice 4.5 out of 7, which actually really aligns well with your initial wanting to give her a 4.5.
It does. It does. I think it's very fitting that she's just slightly above average.
She's definitely, I would recommend if you ever have the chance to pick Sonic Boom up. She is fun in the early parts, and I'm sure you could find some fun with her in the later games as well. She's a great character, and she's a great desk toy. So now with Sonic Boom's babies, calm down after Hugo's harassment, and all put down to bed. Hugo lets us know that Flynn was looking for us and wanted to take us on a tour of our next Dread Yacht destination. So let's make our way over to the Dread Yacht.
The sailing is rather smooth today on the Dread Yacht, considering Flynn's the one piloting and there are a lot of mountains below us. It's actually kind of terrifying when you think about it. But peering through the clouds down to said mountains, I can almost make out what appears to be a desert village. And judging by the side of that mountain face, it looks like this might actually be a mining town. So as it turns out, our dread yacht destination for today, Flynn has brought us to Molkin Mountain from Skylanders Giants. Molkin Mountain is a stage in Skylanders Giants that takes place on the search for the Oracle. And it begins in sort of a desert village and then ends up leading into the mines under the mountain itself. So, Trioxen, what are your initial thoughts on this level?
Well, if I were to take us back in time to when I first played this level, just for those initial thoughts, I probably was just like, oh boy, like another desert kind of level. Like, I'm just generally not a desert level fan. But going through this level and seeing like and experiencing how long it is and how much of a journey and the different, even in this one desert town, there's the amount of locations that you end up in. Like, you start in the town and then you work your way into the mine and then you work your way into this gears and cogs section, and then at the end you get into a battle arena against Pipsqueak, who is quite an entertaining character, I think, for the Giants game itself. Honestly, I really like this one. It's a lot of fun, and it throws a lot of different unique enemies at you too, that depending on what character you're choosing to play as can be actually quite difficult.
That's very fair. And I'm going to agree with you in that it is a really fun level. And there are a lot of unique enemies here, most of which are Cyclopses, but they also introduce some very interesting ones. There are a couple of Drow here as well, but then there's enemies like the Slobbering Mudicus, which is very unique in its design, and they kind of scare me, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I'm equally as horrified, I think.
The biggest downside to this level, in my opinion, is one that you brought up already, and that is its length. It is almost Swap Force levels of long. And I feel like that does bring it down a bit because, while the level is fun overall, it's not fun enough that you don't notice how long it is. It almost gets to be reaching that point where it's basically like, are we done yet? It almost gets to that point where you find yourself wondering if you're done yet or if you're getting close, because it does drag on quite a bit there. I feel like it might have been better off if they had broken it down into two separate levels. Maybe one stage being the desert village itself, and then the next chapter being into the mountain, then coming out through the spear traps and the gears and whatnot, and into the arena battle from there. I feel like if they had broken it down into two separate levels, it would have been so much better than it is, because by the time you get to that arena battle, it's almost wearying to the point where you start to feel like you're out of steam, and therefore the arena battle seems to take longer than it needs to as well. Just because that's the general feel of it, at least what I get from it, when a level drags on just a bit too long.
I agree with you there, especially as you reach that arena battle after going through the longness of the level. And it kind of does the pulls the rug out from under you at the end with Pipsqueak deciding he's going to join the battle, and then you land only one hit on him and he's done. And I remember in my first playthrough initially thinking like, oh, that's just like a fun gag, like for the end of the level, like you beat the boss who only took one hit, cool, let's move on. And then you fight another wave, and the wave also includes that Shadow Duke, which, you know, with a whole wave of enemies and also that in there, it's by the time you're there, you're just ready to be done for the day.
That all being said, I will say that the theming for this level is very strong. Definitely among the better in Giants, in my personal opinion. Now, I know desert levels aren't for everyone, nor are, like, mineshaft levels, but the theme itself was consistent throughout. It felt like the same place. even as you shift from the town into the mountain and through the gears and cogs section all the way to the arena, it felt like the theming was consistent enough that you were in the same place the entire time, just gradually moving from one side to the next.
Yeah, it's definitely a well executed level in terms of not necessarily in length, but in terms of, yeah, you're in the same place and there's enough variation of that place to keep it visually interesting. Because if we were to be staring at the desert sands for that same length of level the entire time,
We'd be playing Swap Force.
it would be a slog. Yeah, it would be Swap Force. So I'm glad for, despite the length, it was able to offer some nice variation all the way through to the end.
And I do like that they had more than just one type of enemy. A lot of stages will do things like you'll only be fighting trolls or only cyclopses. And this had cyclopses and drow. And just having more than one type of enemy, more than one race of enemy, made it a little easier visually to take in as well. Because even with the theming going the way it did, and you seeing the transition from area to area, if the enemies had been entirely the same the whole way through, even through that arena battle, it once again would have just made it feel a lot more like it was longer and drawn out for no reason, and like you weren't getting anywhere.
Yeah, it's like those cartoons where they just keep the animation cycle of the same hallway going the same way through. It'd feel like that, but luckily this does not. With the variety of enemies that they throw at you and different combinations at different places to kind of affect your strategy of who you're targeting first or how you're maneuvering around the ring or the area that you're in, thankfully keeps things fresh.
And they did only seem to have one variety of area hazard, at least through the level section. They did change that up once you hit the arena, but all you really had in the way of area hazards was the spear traps that come through the floor, and I feel like they really overdid that in the area that those were in.
And especially, I think just before that area is where the tech elemental zone is, where you also experience a lot of like that kind of those traps with the like the spinning saws and everything. It's just, if you're going through all the elemental zones and doing everything in one playthrough, it's, yeah, it can wear on you just right before the end.
Right. Overall, it's a fairly solid level, even though it is way too long for what it needed to be, and probably what I would call one of the better designed levels in Giants.
Yeah, I really feel it. And I would add that it's probably one of the better designed desert levels that I've ever had the extreme pleasure of playing in my life, just offering more variety than just sand and beige.
And as chaos erupts in the Mountainside Arena, we beat a hasty retreat out of there, deciding to go ahead and visit Brock in our very own arena.
So as we touch down in Brock's arena, we see Brock standing in his usual position, but he even looks a little confused. We ask him what's the confusion for, and he tells us that he didn't actually have anything planned for us today. Well, that's odd. And then a little bit of delight comes over his face, and he's like, oh, well, it looks like you guys took care of it. It looks like you got a souvenir from Molkin Mountain. He points to the dread yacht, and we turn around, and clutch to the side, oh gosh, it's a slobbering Mudicus. The Mudicus drops down into the arena and starts digging into the earth, looking like it's ready to charge. Today's session of Brock's Baddies, we're going to be dealing with the slobbering Mudicus, unfortunately. So Ditto, tell me, how do you feel about this beauty?
Well, my first thoughts upon seeing this particular creature is I'm going to have nightmares for the next week.
Yeah, if you're lucky, maybe the next month.
I'll point out first that looking at its face, I am very, very much reminded of the Kezu from Monster Hunter, if you're familiar with that series at all. It's not a pleasant sight to behold, that's for sure. But it's a very unique design. I'll give it that much.
There really hasn't. Well, I mean, before Giants and then even after Giants, there really wasn't anything like this in the games.
And I can't help but wonder, are these creatures blind? Because I don't see eyes.
I wondered that too. I always thought they were eyeless, but looking closer at images of them, there appears to be like horse blinders on. So I'm wondering if they maybe have tiny eyes under there.
Oh, that's entirely possible, and they'd just be invisible to us because they're hidden.
Mm-hmm.
And that would also make sense along with the fact that these are generally ridden by Cyclops. Like, they're mounted by Cyclops, who then steer them as one would a horse or whatnot in order to do combat with the Skylander.
That does create an interesting dynamic then, where your rider Cyclops is the eyes of the combined force, and then the slobbering Mudicus is the muscle. Which is a cool dynamic, I think. And then even later on in combat with them, after you defeat the Cyclops on their back, the slobbering Mudicus will still try to attack, but in more of a rampagey fashion.
That dynamic reminds me very much of the Squawk and Awe enemy from Skylanders Imaginators as well. The vulture enemies, where the one small one is riding atop the back of a much larger one. Once again, one being the eyes and one being the muscle.
Oh, that's really cool. So it almost, in a way, harkens to that, or it's just a really cool dynamic that keeps persisting through these games.
It's one that I think has only shown up a couple of times, so I think that might have been a harkening back to the slobbering Mudicus here from Giants.
Which I think is, honestly, is really cool of them to do, because this is a very unique creature, to say the least. Like, with the name Slobbering Mudicus, it does make you think of a dog, even sort of in its design, sort of, but the sort of combination of bear and lamprey and I don't even know what else. Nightmare fuel.
Put simply, Nightmare Fuel is the best way to describe the slobbering Mudicus, but for those who may be unfamiliar with this creature and what it looks like, it is a quadrupedal kind of fleshy beast with 4 very long claws on each limb, and its face is entirely mouth, with what appears to be razor sharp teeth in it. It doesn't appear to have eyes, but as we pointed out earlier, it could have very small eyes behind what appear to be blinders, and it's sort of hunched in the back, so it looks almost like the front haunches are styled after a bear, and maybe the rear is styled more like a horse or a bull or something like that, but also with claws. It's a very grotesque and unpleasant design, but I will praise its uniqueness.
Yeah, I can't help but feel that the designer who created this was given a task of just creating something terrifying to put in this game. But actually, looking back, this creature was actually designed back in the Spyro's Kingdom era, where it was potentially a playable character with a rider on top.
Now, that's an interesting tidbit to know. I did not know this.
So the fact that this creature design was way back in the early stages of Skylanders beginning and then didn't appear into the games until the second outing, that's quite something.
It really is.
All right, Ditto. So how would you rate on a scale of 1 to 7 the very grotesque and nasty slobbering Mudicus?
I think I'm going to have to rate it kind of low score simply because it's not a fun creature to look at. It's unique, but it's not fun to look at. It's terrifying. I don't want to see it in battle either because it's actually pretty threatening as well. So overall, I think I would probably give the slobbering Mudicus a 3 out of 7.
That's a fair score there. Personally, I think I'm going to rate this guy a little bit higher just because I am a glutton for punishment in the sense of looking at things that scare me. And then just, I remember very clearly the first time seeing this guy show up in my original playthrough and kind of being very, what's the word, disoriented, shocked, scared, appalled. It almost clashed with everything else I'd seen at that point, and it felt like pure terror shocked through my core. So personally, I'm gonna have to give the Slobbering Mudicus a 5. So with Ditto's score and mine combined and averaged out, the Slobbering Mudicus is ranked at a solid 4. Perfectly average. So with the Slobbering Mudicus defeated, we dust our hands, ready to call it a day, when Brock charges full bore into both of us and knocks us down into his arena from his throne. We land with a hard thud, and we hear him very angrily shouting at us, "Don't you dare call my baddies ugly and grotesque. Now you have to fight."
A little disoriented, we get up and dust ourselves off. Brock's never really been that violent with us before. But at the same time, it's kind of understandable. We did insult his little beastie. Therefore, the least we can do to make up for it is give him a good show. So we step forward, activating our portals, and Ox, who are you summoning to champion for you today in this Archean Arena battle?
Well, Ditto, I've been very heavily influenced by our surroundings on our journeys today. So the Skylander I'm picking, as I place my hand over my portal and will him to be summoned, is this Earth Skylander Scorp.
Ooh, did not see that coming.
I like to pull the wild cards. So Scorp is an Earth Elemental. He is a mixed battle class. He has a health of 780, a critical hit of 60, armor 31, speed 32, and luck of 26. His attack 1 is the Emerald Crystal, which deals 15 damage and then 27 damage on a finish. His attack 2 is a Tail Sting, which deals 12 damage and 10 on a finish. Attack 3 is a Shoulder Roll, which deals 47 damage. And then his top path is the Stinger Path, where he will gain upgrades to allow his attack 2 to cause a shockwave and increase damage and increases the damage over time. And then his bottom path focuses on his crystals and is called the Crystal Venomancer, where his explosives will stick to enemies, they'll deal more damage, and they split into two after the initial explosion. I'm feeling pretty good about this little scorpion buddy of mine. What do you got for me, Ditto?
I wouldn't be feeling too good if I were you.
Uh-oh.
Reaching out to my portal, focusing on my summon, I call forth the mighty Taekwon Crow to champion for me in today's battle.
Okay then.
Taekwon Crow is a fire element mixed style combatant with a maximum HP at level 20 of 600, critical hit 93, armor 46, speed 71, and luck 33. His attack 1 is called Shuriken Throw, which throws ninja stars at nearby enemies for 87 points of damage per hit. His attack 2 is Flame Kick, which performs a spin kick that lights the ground on fire, dealing 58 points of damage per hit. And his attack 3 is Buzzerbeak, which spawns a Buzzerbeak minion to fight for him. His top path is known as Shuriken Slinger, and what it does is it increases the number of thrown shurikens. Charging attack 1 causes him to throw 2 saws. His bottom path is known as Crowmando, which gives his Flame Kick attack 2 combos, increases the number of Buzzerbeaks he can summon, and improves the strength and speed of said Buzzerbeaks. It's also notable that his Soul Gem allows attack 3 to be charged in order to call down the Big Mama Buzzerbeak.
Well, alrighty then.
Still feeling pretty good?
I think I'm going to rescind my previous statement. Before we get into this, I do want to give I don't know, a bonus award to your choice of Taekwon Crow for having the path called Crowmando. It is an enjoyable pun.
It's a very enjoyable pun. I rather like it.
It's perfect. Yeah, I oof. So even if you were just to look at this as a numbers game, Scorp only outpaces Taekwon Crow in one stat, and that is health, and it's only by 180 points. So it's not even by a large enough margin to make it count.
Both of these Skylanders also have very similar range on their ranged attacks. So it's not clear that one can outdistance the other. They seem to be about on par.
Yeah, and even if like it was a matter of trying to like Scorp to outpace Taekwon Crow or just get out of the way, the fact that Taekwon Crow's speed is double that, essentially double that of Scorp's, oh, I don't have much hope for this little guy.
I can honestly say I would have trouble deciding which path I want to take, because on the one hand, ranged attacks tend to be in my favor here, because Scorp is also a ranged attacker, so getting in close is a little more difficult. So having the shuriken throw split into 3 shurikens is actually really, really beneficial, because that's more damage, or at least more area that I can damage all at once. Whereas on the other hand, if I take the other path, I can combo the flame kick, and I'm then relying on buzzer beaks to do damage for me, which, not counting the Big Mama one, only do about 29 points of damage per hit, which is rather weak by comparison. Although having more than one of them actively attacking at a time would add that up really, really quickly. So it's kind of a toss-up as to whether I would want to have more of a minion focus, or if I would just want to be dealing direct damage with my shurikens. In this case, especially since I have access to that soul gem and can still summon the Big Mama buzzer beak, I think I would want to go with the top path. My strategy would be to try to keep Big Mama on the field as much as possible, because that is extra damage, and then just basically bombard Scorp with shurikens the entire way. Or, as able, I can also charge up that shuriken throw to throw the 2 ground saws forward. It doesn't have as much area, but it has just as much range and deals more damage because it's a charged attack. So I think that would be my focus, is to just bombard with shurikens and occasionally ground saws if available, while keeping the Big Mama Buzzerbeak on the field to do as much damage as she can as well, and hope for the best.
Honestly, I don't know if you have to do much hoping. I honestly think Taekwon Crow's gonna be pretty comfy in this one. I don't want to be a pessimist the whole way through.
Right, it's just 87 points of damage per shuriken does add up really, really quickly.
And plus having everything else out on the field that you can, I just the hope for the Scorpion is dwindling.
I'm sure there's a strat that might put you back in the game.
Yeah, and thinking about it, I think my best option with Scorp would be to start off with to pick a path. I would definitely go with Crystal Venomancer. I think having more strength put towards the crystals, the ranged attack, is going to be a necessity in this case, especially when they explode. They split into 2 smaller ones. It just helps create more damage as the battle goes on. Scorp's strongest attack, though, okay, so I wouldn't say strongest, but the one that deals the most initial damage is his shoulder roll. And plus, with his soul gem, he can dash as long as the button is held. Scorp can do a continuous dash, which could help him get out of sticky situations and also deal damage if he's going to try and bulldoze right through Taekwon Crow.
I feel like that dash could very much be a key element to dodging techniques and trying to get out of the way of some of those shurikens, so that maybe you can try and get yourself an edge as some of those crystals explode.
Yeah, this would be a game of basically Dark Souls. I'm trying to Dark Souls Scorp through this combat, where it's just rolling to avoid as much damage and stopping to throw some ranged crystal orbs in the meantime, in between rolling. I feel like that's going to be probably the best outcome for Scorp. And just, honestly, yeah, just avoiding damage and trying to deal as much as possible.
And honestly, with that dash attack, depending on how well you're able to dodge, I could even see Scorp winning a few of these. That crystal damage does add up, and if you're not getting hit, you're not getting hit. Granted, you're not going to be able to dodge the buzzer beak probably as well as you're going to be able to dodge the shurikens, because that's AI controlled and kind of has a mind of its own as such. But if you can predict where my shurikens are going to be, then there's no reason a dash attack shouldn't carry you out of the way. Having double your speed doesn't exactly give me an edge against an attack that does dash like that, especially since you can do it for as long as you can hold the button.
Yeah.
I feel like a very dodge and chip style of combat would play in Scorp's favor if you can keep it up, and could actually possibly lead to pulling out a few wins. I can't say that it would be enough to win the majority here, but I can say that if played well enough, Scorp still got this a little bit.
That's great to hear. And it's, yeah, it would have to be a very fast on the fingers, fast on the feet, kind of edge of your seat the whole time kind of play, I think.
Correct, because those shurikens can be spammed pretty quickly.
Yeah, if we were sitting down and actually having this, I probably would be sweating up a storm. Just, it would be very tense, to say the least.
Whereas on Taekwon Crow's side of things, even should Taekwon Crow manage to lose, he's still feeling pretty comfy the entire way. There's not much sweating going on that side.
Yeah. Which is still, it's an interesting matchup and it's a fun one.
Oh, by all means. And I would love to have had the opportunity to sit down and actually play this one out, because I'm actually genuinely curious as to if the roles were reversed. If you were playing Taekwon Crow, could I play Scorp in such a way that that strategy works out and I could win?
Yeah, 100%. Like, again, we mention it all the time on this in this segment, but just the amount of variation between players and paths and attacks, it could be a different outcome every time.
It absolutely could. And the sad fact of the matter in this case is that we can't sit down and actually have this match because they did cut the in-game PvP options from the game after Swap Force. So Taekwon Crow doesn't really have the option to sit down and do any of that.
Unfortunately.
Now, that all being said, well, the player behind the controller does help determine the outcome quite a lot. The outcome of this particular Archean Arena battle is pretty clearly cut and dry. The winner of today's Archean Arena is going to be Taekwon Crow with flying colors.
Yeah, this sensei just aced this exam, that's for sure.
As the dust settles in the Archean Arena and the champion is firmly declared, Brock nods approvingly, forgiving our earlier transgression of insulting his baddie. We are free to return to the Academy. Chill Bill, why don't you take us away?
That concludes this episode of Skylanders Portalcasters. You'll find the website and links to the hosts' individual channels in the description. Follow the Skylanders Portalcasters Twitter for regular updates about this podcast. And join Discord server for Skylanders discussion. Until next time, this is Chill Bill with K-Troll signing off.
One could say he's speed running his way over here.